welcome to Nothing Ever Happens in Canada, but we know this is simply not true. I'm Canadian Girl. Thanks for joining me today. This is a Canadian podcast about the myths, legends, and just good old stories Canada has to tell. We're off to explore the mysterious Nahanni Valley, way up north in the Northwest Territories here in Canada. We'll actually only be 1,894 kilometers away from the Arctic Circle, so just think about that. I hope you brought your best scarves, mitts, boots. She's gonna be a cold one. Our plane is just about to land here in Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories, so we can grab our flight to the famous Virginia Falls and set up camp for the night. You won't believe the sights you'll see in the morning, and if we're really lucky, we might even get to see the northern lights on our adventure. Let's go hop on our plane and get out of here. Just a little word of caution before we head out. This story is a little darker than most of mine on my channel. We deal with some murders and legends that do not end in the nicest details. But that being said, I will not be getting into anything like that too much. Just have to point it out when necessary. I want you to be aware before hopping on this plane. If these are things that you don't want to hear about, I suggest you choose another adventure. That being said, seatbelts on, seats in the upright position, and we're off. We fly into an area known as the Decho region of the Northwest Territories, just 500 kilometers west of Yellowknife. Here we will spend the night at the famous Virginia Falls, located in the Nahanni National Park Reserve of Canada. We will be surrounded by what are known as the Mackenzie Mountains, along a beautiful white river, the South Nahanni. We will travel through 4 canyons, one of them being the deepest one in Canada, and explore the breathtaking scenery while learning about the mysterious tales that go along with each. The river runs the length of the park and ends when it meets the Laird River near a very small town called Nahanni Butte, which according to Stats Canada, in 2017 had only 97 full-time residents. For our trip, we are only going to cover about 140 kilometers. The whole river itself is well over 300. The Nahanni River is also a rare example of a pre-existing river, which to my understanding means when those mountains came rising up, the Nahanni stood its ground and runs in the same route pretty much today as it did back then. That's some pretty powerful water. According to Parks Canada, 42 different mammals are known to hang out here, along with 180 birds, 16 types of fish, and a few amphibians. There are 10 species in the park that are either on the endangered species list or of very special concern. Be on the lookout for these rare creatures, as it may be sadly one of the last times you see them if we don't get our acts together. I'm even pointing my finger at myself here. We are all guilty of what we have done to this earth. If you see an olive-sided flycatcher, which is a type of bird, a peregrine falcon, short-eared owl, rusty blackbird, wood bison, woodland caribou, a wolverine, or a grizzly bear, these are all a few types of the very rare guys, so do keep your eyes open for them. The creatures we are most likely to run into on our trip are river otters, beavers, red fox, golden eagles, loons, trumpeter swans, moose, deer, timber wolf, and even a black bear or two. The valley even has its own special flower that grows nowhere else in the world but here, due to the mist from Virginia Falls, known as the Nahanni aster. It's a light pink or purple tiny flower that looks similar to a small daisy. It was listed as a special concern under the Federal Species Act at risk in 2018, adding another very rare and unique thing to the Nahanni Valley's ever-growing list. The Nahanni Valley has been known for so many years as an area to possibly be hiding untapped gold mines. Though no significant proof of these claims have ever been proven, the stories have lived on for years. The name Nahanni comes from the Indigenous Dene language. The Dene would refer to the area as the Naha Denhe. This meant the river of the land of the Naha people. The Dene are the Indigenous people who have lived in the area around the Nahanni Valley for over 10,000 years. Local oral history contains many references to a Naha tribe of warriors known to dwell in the valleys surrounding mountains. The violent tribe was known to raid local settlements in nearby lower lands, leaving many people terribly wounded and beheaded those that they killed. They would take all resources, attack in the middle of the night, and without warning, wearing masks and armor with frightening images painted on them. They were said to be larger than most human beings. The Dene lived in constant fear of their mountain-dwelling neighbors. Oral history also tells tales of these unbearable Naha warriors simply vanishing into thin air. One of these tales is, one night it is said Dene tribesmen headed out to find the dreaded Naha warriors and put an end to the fighting once and for all. What they said they found was not what they were expecting. An empty camp with fires still going, tents still full of personal belongings, and not a trace of a Naha warrior could be found anywhere. They had simply vanished. The Dene never saw them again. The Dene have never wanted to live or go close to the valley. Those who live in the area believe the valley to be evil, haunted by spirits, specters, which are like ghosts, and devils. But we're here for the gold. That's right, the bright, shiny, said to be grape-sized to hen-sized nuggets of gold found along this beautiful river. We're searching for clues to the missing MacLeod millions, the lost gold of Shangri-La Valley, but most often called the Lost MacLeod Brothers Gold Mine. In 1823, a man named Alexander MacLeod, no relation to the brothers mentioned above that I could find. He was a Hudson's Bay fur trader and recently had been in the Nahanni Valley. Taken aback by its natural beauty and rumors of gold, he would write about his journey into the valley, sparking many others to head north to discover the rare furs and gold. In the early 1900s, tales of a Bishop Burner who was located in Fort Simpson, where we hopped on the plane back there, had received gold nuggets from a Dene tribesman known as Little Nahanni. He had apparently found these gold nuggets in the South Nahanni River from the upper banks located just beyond the Great Falls. He would then have those nuggets made into a ring, watch, and a chain. That ring would be seen by a man named Albert Faily in 1932. We will meet him in a bit. Sparking gold fever into Mr. Faily, he would spend the rest of his life searching for the lost MacLeod gold mine. Oh, there's just one more thing. Now I know we said it was pretty cold here, right? So in reality, we could never make this journey in mid-April. We would freeze to death and the river would be frozen. But we're a part of the podcast world and it's full of magic. Thank goodness for that. And we know how to time travel on this podcast. We've done it before. This time, we don't need to go as far though, so we can do it a lot quicker. If you've got a glass or a mug in front of you, spin it to the opposite side you are drinking out of. Close your eyes. No peeking, you know the rules. Tongue to the roof of your mouth. And think really, really hard about warm weather. And we're off. Great job, guys. We did it again. Good morning and welcome to Virginia Falls, known by the local Indigenous people as Nalicho. I hope I said that right. Did everybody sleep okay out here in the wilderness? I know I sure did. It's now mid-July thanks to our little time travel trick, and the average temperature for our journey today is about 16 degrees. That's 60 degrees Fahrenheit for those southern friends. So that's definitely better than when we started out our journey at minus 15. Southern friends, that's cold. Let's take a look at this beautiful masterpiece Mother Nature has created for us right up here in the Northwest Territories. She is more than 2 times the height of our beloved Niagara Falls here in Ontario, Canada, at 90 meters high and 259 meters wide. For my American listeners, that's 290 feet high and 850 feet wide. She spews out 3 billion cubic feet of water each day, pouring down 30 stories, and is louder than a freight train. She makes the earth shake, and if you are close enough, she'll blow your hat right off your head. Her mist is so powerful. Say hello to the Northern Wonder, Miss Virginia Falls. Very few people have actually seen Virginia Falls in person, and due to its location, it will stay that way, making it kind of part of the Northern Club. If you've actually been lucky enough to see it, you can put your name on that list. And we can too, because we just joined it. See that big huge rock in the middle of the falls? It's unofficially named Mason's Rock, after a famous Canadian canoeist, author, and filmmaker who loved the park dearly, Bill Mason. He is most widely known for his documentary on the wolves, and of course I will include a link below to that. It is quite a great movie. Bill was born in 1929, Winnipeg, Manitoba. He spent his life in the outdoors of Canada, sharing it with everyone through his writing and his films. Unfortunately, he would pass away in 1998 due to a battle with cancer, but his children, Becky and Paul, have followed in their father's footsteps, continuing his legacy. In honor of the late canoeist, a Nahanni Park ranger began calling the rock Mason's Rock, and the name has stuck around. Mason was also honored by Canada Post with a stamp issued in 1998, the same year he passed. This beautiful valley and all its mysteries was named one of Canada's 7 wonders by CBC Television, who had a contest where people could vote in 2007. The park itself is a fly-in only park, meaning just that. There are no roads in or out. You can also enter by boat along the river, of course. About 800 to 1,000 people each year show up and take on the mysterious Nahanni Valley, most of whom are overnight guests. You must register with a Parks Canada official upon arriving in the park, and you must check out within 24 hours after leaving the park. A reservation is required to stay at Virginia Falls Camp, like we just did last night, so do make sure you call ahead for that. All other campsites are first come, first serve. The park is open all year round, and most people come between June, July, and August. It is highly recommended by Parks Canada when traveling in the park to have a guide at all times, especially along the river. The park is not only loved by those searching for gold, but also by adventurers, explorers, canoe enthusiasts, and mountain climbers. About 118 kilometers away from where we are now, and we certainly don't have time to get there on this trip, you could find the Fairy Meadows, located just below the Valley of the Unclimbables. It is a hippie child's dreamland, a massive field full of wildflowers in every color imaginable. Also, in late summer, the meadow is covered in tents as mountain climbers from all over the world gather to challenge themselves. The steep mountains guarding the valley below are considered as sacred grounds to some and are known as the Cirque of the Unclimbables. Said to be some of the most dangerous dramatic peaks in Canada, the biggest flower of them all, the Lotus Flower Tower. It is one of the most famous peaks of the Cirque of the Unclimbables at the towering 2,570 meters, or 8,431 feet. Can you imagine climbing that? It's being ranked one of the top 50 climbs of the most popular in the world. There is another famous peak in the valley, about 30 kilometers or so down the river, known as Mount Nirvana, unofficially. It's more officially named the Unnamed Peak. It's the highest peak in the Northwest Territories, at 2,773 meters, or 9,098 feet. Further to the north, the second highest peak goes to Mount Sir James McBrien, at a close 2,759 meters, or 9,052 feet. It's only about 14 meters or 46 feet difference. When you're talking mountains, that's pretty damn close. And third goes to the Lotus Flower Tower. But back to the falls. The rumored MacLeod Brothers gold mine, that we will discuss more in detail later, is actually suspected to just be up ahead in Dead Man's Valley, off the Flat River area. But there is also tales of another location that the gold is supposedly somewhere past Virginia Falls, and one must climb up and over the falls and continue on in order to find it. A feat very many people have survived to talk about. But like I said, we'll get into all that later. Right now, we're just here to enjoy the falls. look guys, it's some of those Nahanni asters just up there on the left. A flower you will only see here. Get those cameras out. Well, we're off to our next location, Deadman's Valley, where our story begins. First, we have to paddle through Painted Canyon, 5 Mile Canyon, or better known as 4th Canyon. It's about 8 kilometers long and has very steep canyon walls. The canyon is said to be created by the falls eroding the limestone surrounding the river. Limestone, water, and very strange things happening. If you listen to my episode about the most haunted city in Canada, we discussed how the city of Kingston, Ontario is surrounded by limestone, water, and there's a lot of strange things happening there. I just wanted to point that out. This part of the river is said to be the hardest part of the river to paddle due to the power of the falls, so don't expect it to all be like this. It will get easier. As you look up, you'll notice a tall range of mountains when we enter the 3rd canyon. Some believe they look like tombstones standing there, marking the graves of the many men who have perished in the valley searching for the lost MacLeod gold mine, earning them the name Funeral Range. This canyon is about 40 kilometers long and has more of a sloped wall. Make sure you have your cameras ready. 1, in case we see any of those rare animals roaming around, and 2, because there's a well-known landmark on this route known as the Gate and Pulpit Rock. Between the rock and the canyon wall, a 200-meter high gate appears that one must pass through. Since we've got some time here, I thought I'd fill you in on some more tales the valley is hiding. The Dene, the local Indigenous people, told stories of many mysterious creatures lurking in the Nahanni region and forest. Legends of a bear dog roaming in the area, ripping people's heads off, is most common. Many people suspect this is possibly a dire wolf still roaming the area. But we're not going to hunt him today. I'll leave that one for someone else. Unless you guys want me to come back hunting for him, we can do that. Let me know. Bigfoot is another popular visitor to the area, but if you know him at all, he's everywhere that's creepy and weird. Oh, and of course, the UFOs. These guys hang out here as well. Some suspect they are trying to get into the center of the earth. That's right, the portal, door, whatever you want to call it, to the center of the earth, that's supposedly here too. I told you this place was full of mysteries. There's also a tale of a white queen ruling over the Naha warriors and commanding them to murder all who enter the valley. Again, we're not going chasing after her today because, to be honest, the Naha warriors and her scare me. Oh, and on a happier note, we're in luck. There's a few wood bisons just up here on the riverbank, so do steady those cameras and no paddling, everybody. We'll just glide by and try not to scare them. Next, we're just about at a really cool part of the river, right at the end of the 3rd canyon, where we transition into the 2nd canyon. We'll be doing a 45-degree turn known as Big Bend. Definitely be hanging on tight during that corner. The 2nd canyon runs through Headless Range, is about 15 kilometers long, so I hope you got it in you. It's another little bit before we get to set up camp, and this canyon leads us right to Deadman's Valley, where the legend of the lost MacLeod gold mine really begins. There's a school of otters just ahead of us on the right of the canoes. It seems there is also a peregrine falcon just up there on the ledge. Who knew in a place known as Headless Range we'd see so many animals? Our camp is just up here now. Let's pull up our canoes for the night and set up camp. I'll tell you the story of Frank and Willie MacLeod, the 2 brothers, around the fire, who made this valley famous for having long-lost gold, right after we have some much-deserved dinner. Is everybody here? Can you all feel the heat from the fire? And most important, can you all hear me? Okay, good. I found most of this tale in a pretty awesome book called The Lost Bonanzas of Western Canada. I will include a link below, so when we're back in civilization and have internet, You can check it out if you're interested. It was around 1904 when Frank and Willie MacLeod, two young brothers who were from Fort Laird, they would head out to the Flat River area after hearing tales of an Indigenous tribesman handing out gold nuggets the size of eggs that he had found along the Nahanni Valley. The Flat River runs along the side of the South Nahanni River and eventually cuts into it. Well, in this area, the brothers met and tried to learn from local tribesmen where the gold could be found. But Frank claimed the Indigenous men were very vague about giving up the location. Could you blame them? The boys would apparently strike it rich somewhere along the Flat River and a junction to Bennett's Creek, but between greed and poor planning, they did not have the proper equipment or skills to return with the treasure, and unfortunately lost it all when their boat capsized in the terrible rapids known as the Cascade of 13 Drops. They would return to Fort Laird broke and starving, but motivated to return. The brothers would work the winter at the Hudson Bay Company and save every penny for their spring expedition. Though they tried hard to keep their gold mine a secret, word would spread like gold fever does in a small town, and the boys became quite well known quickly for their find. They would tell stories of the valley's great beauty and speak of waterways that stretched on forever, as well as a strange valley that was always warm, heated by numerous hot springs in the area, and claimed that it was home to many exotic animals, birds, butterflies, and plants. They would then meet fellow prospector and Scotsman known as Wilkinson, who wanted to accompany the brothers on their next expedition, and they happily agreed. That spring in 1905, the men would all head out together in search of the riches the brothers had been speaking about for the whole year before. After this, not much is known other than the brothers did not return to Fort Laird as scheduled. The spring and summer of 1906 and 1907 would come and go, and the MacLeod brothers would not return. Their third brother, Charlie, decided he could wait no more for them to return and went out searching the Nahanni Valley for his brothers in 1908. Charlie asked the odd trapper or Indigenous person as he ran into them if anyone had seen 3 prospectors in the area, and the answer was always no. Charlie would continue to paddle upriver. He began to notice the air was a bit warmer, and the river had more foliage growing along the banks than before. He remembered the tales his brother had told of the strange warm valley. Noticing the change in his surroundings, he began to pay a bit more attention. He noticed a clearing on a beach and pulled his canoe on shore to take a look. He first spotted an old sled that had writing on it. He read it, "We found a fine prospect." He knew right away that was his brother's writing. But that was all he found. He got back in his canoe and paddled on. It was not long, and he was paddling out of Second Canyon and into Deadman's Valley, right towards his brother's campsite unknowingly. He would again pull his canoe up on the shore and proceed to investigate another site. This time, he would find a rusted-out rifle lying up against a tree, and then he spotted his brother's bedrolls, which from my understanding are sleeping bags. What he found next would horrify him for the rest of his life. His brothers were in those sleeping bags, and all that was left was their bones. Charlie would search the campsite for clues, but came up with nothing. What he did know for sure, though, was there was no sign of Wilkinson at all, the third man the brothers had left with, and that did not sit right with Charlie. Charlie would return to Fort Laird and report his brother's deaths to the authorities. Charlie then returned to the camp with the RCMP, and what he did not realize when he was there the first time, as he was most likely in so much shock, his brothers' heads were both missing. Legend from this day forth would run rapid through the valley and outside of it, of the gold, of the headless men, and forever changing the canyon names to mark these events. The RCMP simply passed the murders off as a bear mauling, or the brothers had been unprepared and starved to death. But the brothers' full skeletons were found in their sleeping bags, so this never sat well with Charlie. Bears do not just take heads, and he always maintained that the heads looked surgically removed. Charlie never liked the idea that Wilkinson or his stuff was never found at the campsite. He strongly believed he had murdered his brothers, taking the heads to conceal their identity and the crime. Charlie also said one of his brother's arms was outstretched as if reaching for the rifle by the tree in his last act of defense. Another fact, none of the gold picks, axe, or shovels were ever found at the campsite, which led Charlie to believe the tools were still at the mine his brothers had found, and the person who had murdered them had made off with their treasure. All that was ever found on their campsite were some pieces of gold-bearing quartz. The brothers were laid to rest by the Nahanni River, and their tale has never been forgotten, nor has their lost MacLeod gold mine. Well, that was quite a tale indeed. I hope you can get some sleep tonight, because we're off to discover the first canyon in the morning, and I have some more stories to tell you. And remember, if you do get up in the night, make sure to check for those northern lights. So how was everybody's rest after that story last night? I don't know about you, but every bump in the night sure had my heart going. So I'm very glad it's morning now. Hop back in your canoes when you're good and ready, because we're off to explore the first canyon today, and she's absolutely stunning. So do have your cameras out again, and of course I've got some stories to get into along the way, and we're going to start with a man named Martin Jorgensen. But first, let's take a good look around. As we enter the first canyon, right as the sun is rising, the colors are just remarkable all around us. It's like she wants you to forget we were just in a place called Dead Man's Valley. She has the highest walls in the entire canyon at 1,300 meters. That's 4,265 feet, and is the deepest river canyon in all of Canada. The fourth canyon is pretty impressive too, at 1,200 meters. Also, at the end of this 30-kilometer long canyon, there is a wonderful place known as Kraus Hot Springs, waiting for us to soak in. That's about 37 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit. So if that isn't enough motivation to get to the end of this canyon today, I don't know what is. Now let's talk about Martin Jorgensen, a Swiss prospector. He was found a few years later in 1913, some say 1917. He seemed to have settled very well in the valley, building himself a small cabin, running a tiny mining operation, and sending letters off to friends back home. He was well known in the area by other settlers, but unfortunately he was found beside the burnt remains of his cabin along the flat river, just Jorgensen's body, which was a skeleton and it had no head. There is also claims of a note being found stating that he had struck it rich, but to be honest, I don't know how a note survives if the cabin is burnt to the ground. Though it does seem like he may have known too much. There are reports he sent a letter to a fellow prospector friend back home telling him he had found the mine, but he never gave up the location, so the secret went with him. In 1932, Angus Hall, a prospector as well, who had heard about the MacLeod brothers' Shangri-La mine, had come to the Nahanni Valley and, of course, disappeared. It seems anyone looking for the gold in this valley does not fare well. Also, in 1932, Albert Faily, who we will meet shortly, I promise, discovered just a few bones at a camp believed to be those of the missing prospector Phil Powers, also in a burnt-down cabin. In 1936, Mulholland and Epler would disappear, two more prospectors after the fabled MacLeod mine simply vanished into thin air. Not a single trace of them or their camp has ever been found. In 1945, a miner from Ontario was found with no head at his camp in his sleeping bag. There is another trapper by the name of John O'Brien. Around the same time, he was found frozen to death by a fire with matches in his hand. The fire pit did show evidence that it had been burning, and those who did encounter his remains said it was like he was flash frozen. In 1949, a prospector by the name of Schubach was found in his cabin with a diary that showed he had been starving for 43 days, and on a piece of wood he wrote, "Dead man here," and nailed it to the cabin door and went inside to pass away. In total, around 44 people have either vanished without a trace, vanished under strange circumstances, or have been found in not the best of ways. The majority of the 44 people were all searching for gold. It seems those who visit the Nahanni Valley simply for pleasure seem to make it out unscathed. As I mentioned earlier, almost 1,000 people show up here every year, but those who go looking for the gold seem to have a dark curse that follows them. But enough about all that. We're getting closer to our hot springs. Near the hot springs area, there is a warm mist all the time, almost like a fog. The area never freezes and is home to lush tropical plants, even roses and fruit. All that can be found here, so do keep your eyes open for those. They would be pretty neat to see up here. A prospector is even quoted as saying, "The game was so well fed in this area, it looks square." Some even believe the area was once home to creatures like mastodons and other animals thought to be long extinct, as men would return from the frozen valley with ivory tusks, still having flesh and fur on them. Perfect, we're just in time, 'cause there's our camp. It's known as the Splits. Pull your canoes up and get ready to relax and dive into those hot springs, 'cause it's been a long day of paddling for sure. Now that we're settled in, I wanted to show you something special here at the Kraus Hot Springs. It's known as the Cabin of Paddles. It is a must-add for your bucket list if you are a lover of the gray canoe. Hand-carved and decorated paddles from all over the world have been hung up in the cabin and left for all who make this incredible journey to read and enjoy. Names of fellow adventurers, their hometowns, amazing drawings, and unforgettable stories have all been placed on the paddle as a keepsake memory in the cabin. A fun fact, Justin Trudeau's autograph can be found on one of the paddles. So I'll just let you spend some time here and enjoy them for a bit. And also, of course I brought us one. So get your names and stories on there, 'cause they're gonna know we were here. While we sit here in the hot springs, do look around for some parsnip, onions, and other exotic garden plants. This was once home to a lovely couple known as Gus and Mary Kraus, who lived here from 1940 to 1971. A small cabin still stands from when they were here, and some of their beloved garden crops. Though it does smell like rotten eggs here due to the sulfur from the hot springs, I can see why. If you were going to stay anywhere in the Nahanni Valley, I'd certainly pick here too. Another really cool story about how this beautiful park came to be. In 1964, an explorer and parachutist from Montreal named Jean Poiriel jumped out of a plane 500 kilometers north of Yellowknife along with his teammate Bertrand Bon. They saw the Great Nahanni River from the sky and pictured themselves floating down it with inflatable dinghies. And Poiriel, he would do just that. He would make 4 trips in total, discovering 250 caves. The most notable was one containing 116 dull sheep skeletons that were carbon dated back to 2500 BC. Jean Poiriel would name that cave after his daughter, Valerie. Today it is known as the Valerie Cavern. Notice here, Poiriel makes it out alive, and more than once, and he is described as an explorer. I found no mention of him ever actually looking for gold. He is also responsible for drawing hundreds of topographical maps of the area, leading the way for the park's creation as a national park. His last expedition to the park in 1972, when he brought then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, he would escort him along the magnificent valley so Trudeau could evaluate the park in person. No pressure. You just have the Prime Minister of all of Canada in your boat in one of the most known to be dangerous places in the Northwest Territories. The same year, after this trip, Prime Minister Trudeau would name the Nahanni Valley as a national park at 4,766 kilometers squared. In the end, on June 9, 2009, the Government of Canada, along with the Dehcho First Nations, after many long years of debating and research, announced a legislation that would increase the Nahanni National Park borders to cover 30,000 kilometers squared, which includes 91% of the greater Nahanni ecosystem in the Dehcho region and most of the South Nahanni River watershed. The area is home today to an estimated 500 grizzly bears, 2 herds of woodland caribou, sheep, goats, and more. The new park boundaries cover the highest mountain peaks and the largest ice fields. The park was among one of the first 4 to be made a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. The same year, our Viking settlement in Newfoundland was made one as well. Shortly after all this excitement, there were 2 earthquakes in the valley. First was on October the 5th of 1985, and the second would follow on December 23rd and was much more severe, measuring at 6.9. It was the most significant earthquake to take place in Canada in the 20th century. In 1987, the South Nahanni River would receive the honor of the Canadian Heritage River status. The most recent exploration to date done on the valley has determined there is to be a vast number of unknown cavern systems and tons of underground hot springs still yet to be discovered and explored. They even found possible vents leading down into the earth not previously known to be there. But yeah, I could just stay in these hot springs all day. So who killed these men? There is a very suspicious man named Albert Johnson, who I will do a podcast on one day and tell you so much more about him, as my dad gave me a very old book regarding Mr. Johnson, but that's for another day. Shout out to my dad. But back to Albert Johnson. He was commonly known as the Rat River Trapper, or simply the Mad Trapper. It is thought that he may have been involved in the Nahanni Valley murders, as it is believed he came from the east before arriving in Ross River in the Yukon area, meaning he just may have took the Nahanni Valley to get there. But traveling east does not make one guilty. It was the gold teeth found in his cabin after his death. Many believe the gold teeth belonged to some of the murdered prospectors in the Nahanni Valley. I could find very little proof to this tale, but I wanted to point it out as I found the connection very interesting. Another suspect was Bobby Weir, also known as Wilkinson, the Scotsman the MacLeod's brothers had originally left with. Depending on what tale you read, he seems to have different names, adding to his suspicion. Some say he vanished after the brothers were murdered, but when reports of him did turn up here and there, he had gold on him. Many also point out that many people may have simply forgot to check back out of the park upon leaving, and could simply go on living their lives and never know they were reported missing up in the Northwest Territories, especially back then. With all the wild animals roaming around, lack of resources, just about anything could truly happen up there. What do you think happened? I do have a funny feeling that there is someone or something up there that does not want the gold to be found. Whether they are still there now, I'm not sure about that. Moving on now that we are all the way down here at the hot springs, I want you to meet someone who has spent many years searching for the lost gold. It's 1962, and we meet Northwest Territory local resident, Albert Faily. He lives in Fort Simpson, where we flew out of on our plane at the very beginning. He lives alone in his cabin and travels alone every year in search of the MacLeod brothers' lost gold. He claims to have tried 7 times to find the mine, and each time he has failed. There is a film by Donald Wider available through the National Film Board of Canada called The Nahanni. I will include a link below. Do check it out, as it provides great visuals to go along with our tale down the river. Plus our friend Albert here is the star of the film, and it's only about 20 minutes. In 1924, Albert Faily immigrates to Canada from the U.S. after serving in the First World War. He settles in the Great Northwest Territories, around Slave Lake. He would spend his first 2 seasons up there as a trapper, making $10,000 his first year. That's $120,000 today. In 1926, he would move from Fort Simpson and send for his wife Marion. Once settled, she would meet him in Edmonton, Alberta by train that same year, but did not want to leave the U.S. and live in the north and went back home. Albert Faily never saw another city again. For almost 40 years, he would spend his time working the trap line in Fort Simpson over the winters, and the summer he spent exploring the nearby land and rivers. He would retire at 63 years old and begin his search for the Nahanni gold. He claimed in 1932 he saw a ring on the bishop burner's finger in Fort Simpson that matched local tales of the bishop receiving gold nuggets from a Dene tribesman. This is what started his gold fever. He also claimed the same tribesmen had met the MacLeod brothers and told them of the famous gold mine. The film I mentioned before shows the roughly 800 kilometers That's 500 miles that Albert Faily makes each time, taking about 6 to 7 weeks long to get from Fort Simpson to the Nahanni and the legendary gold mine at the top of the falls where he begins his panning. Also, did I mention he's 73 years old, and we're about to join him on his 8th trip out thanks to this wonderful film. He tells a story of how one year he got snowed in early and had to build a small cabin and wait out the winter for the ice to thaw so he could get back home. It was not an easy winter either. He almost starved to death. He claims he got scurvy and had to pull out 2 of his own teeth with his own pliers. He told Macleod's magazine in an interview that he did with them that on his way out from this mishap, he ran into the RCMP, who had shovels in hand and had come to bury him knowing he had not returned that winter. Macleod's magazine would also call him one of the last old-school prospectors. When Macleod asked Faily what he thought about the MacLeod brothers and if they were murdered, he replied, no, they probably starved to death. When asked about what happened to their skulls, he replied, grizzly bears. Of all the other mishaps in the park, he claimed, they had bad luck. Another year, his boat capsized, causing him to break his back and almost drown. He then went on to survive a whole winter season alone in Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories. Can you imagine being all alone in the Northwest Territories in a small cabin with a broken back? This man is so unbelievable that on his journey, which he has done 7 times before, and we are joining him on the 8th one now, he must stop and portage to the top of Virginia Falls in order to get to his destination. That's 2 kilometers uphill. This is a 73-year-old man who spends 1 whole week of his journey just carrying stuff like drums of gas, food supplies, and lumber up and over the falls only to rebuild it all and carry on. This time, on the 8th attempt, Albert would discover that the river he once knew above the falls had changed over the winter and spring months. That year had brought tons of boulders, rocks, and silt deposits into the river, creating violent rapids that would prove to be not passable. You can see in the film the heartbroken Faily tries his best to walk through the rapids pulling his boat, but in the end is forced to give up and turn around and head back home. He was only about 65 kilometers from his intended destination. That's about 40 miles. His dreams, if ever striking it rich, were to buy a big old riverboat with a chef and go up and down the Mackenzie River. He has now tried 8 times and failed again. My question is, how did he survive so many times looking for gold when so many clearly did not? I'd say, out of all the gold prospectors, Albert Faily seems to be the luckiest one, or protected by some unknown force, because he's managed to escape the Nahanni prospector's curse every time. Sadly, in 1973, on New Year's Eve, or 1974, New Year's Day, he passed away in his cabin in Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories. To honor the Northern legend, who has been the star of numerous TV series, documentaries, newspaper articles from all over the world, and local legends, the Fort Simpson Historical Society would preserve his cabin just as he left it. There is a small video on YouTube of his home. I will include it in the links below. But now that we are back here in town and all dried off, let's grab a quick bite to eat. Our plane should be here shortly to take us all back home. Oh, and we have to check out with Parks Canada before we leave. We don't want to be known as the next Nahanni Valley's missing person. Thank you for traveling with us today, passengers. If you look out your window, we will be landing at Fort Simpson Airport in about 11 minutes. Skies are clear, and the weather on the ground is 3 degrees Celsius. That's 37.4 Fahrenheit, a lot better than when we left the other day. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I am absolutely amazed by this place. Exhausted too. I have never done so much paddling. Thanks for all your help. I could have never completed this adventure without you guys. From the beautiful fairy meadow to the amazing mountains that touch the sky, the deepest river valley in Canada, the South Nahanni River itself carving its way along the valley for so many years, and meeting remarkable people like Albert Faily, This valley has so many stories to tell and so many mysteries that will most likely never be solved. We could spend months exploring here, if the spirits of the valley would let us, of course. We did get lucky though, not only that we made it out, but we even got to see a few rare animals on the way, and the Nahanni Aster. We had great weather. We got to see one of the biggest falls in Canada. Very cool. What was your favorite part of the trip? I personally can't decide between the falls or the lush beauty surrounding those hot springs. And we can't forget those MacLeod brothers and their legendary gold mine. It's one of the greatest stories that keeps so many coming back year after year. It's even brought us here. But I certainly saw no sign of the mine on our journey. And to be honest, I'm too scared to get caught looking, cause you know what happens then. Also, I enjoyed the cute little cabin full of paddles. Its unique features like this, to the legend of the bear dog said to be possibly a dire wolf still roaming the area today, or the mysterious Naha warriors who were so powerful yet seemed to vanish into thin air. These stories make me love this quirky little country called Canada so much. Every nook and cranny of this country is hiding something unique or weird, and we're going to find them all, I promise. I'm Canadian Girl. Until next time, my friends. Want to help support the show? You can do that in 3 simple ways. The first one, you can leave us a shiny 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. This small gesture means so much to this podcast as it allows us to move around on the podcast charts and meet more awesome listeners like you. The second, you can stop by our souvenir shop and pick up a souvenir from one of our great adventures and take it on your very own. There's t-shirts, water bottles, notebooks, and so much more. Do head over to our souvenir shop today and grab some adventure gear. And finally, the third way you can help support the show is by donation. We have a fancy PayPal button that can be found on the top right of our webpage. This button allows you the option to donate as much as you want, whenever you want. All donations will be used for the channel by buying new books for research and upgrading equipment. All 3 links to help support the show, of course, can be found in the show notes below. I thank you all so much for your support of the show. It means the world to me.